The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long golden streaks across the quiet street lined with neat hedges and modest two-story houses. The late summer heat still clung to the pavement, warming the soles of Daniel's sneakers as he stepped down from the U-Haul, stretching his sore arms and back. The air carried the faint scent of cut grass and asphalt, laced with something softer. Maybe honeysuckle or the distant aroma of a backyard grill. It had been a long day. Moving solo was no joke, even with a back seat stuffed with boxes and the trunk loaded like a game of precarious Tetris. Daniel hadn't wanted to call anyone for help. Not because he didn't have friends, but because he didn't feel like making small talk, didn't want to share the quiet melancholy he always carried when closing one chapter and opening another. This move was supposed to be a fresh start. A blank page. A little house in a town no one knew him in, where he could exhale for the first time in months. He didn't expect anyone to notice him. He didn't expect the man next door. Need a hand? The voice came just as Daniel hoisted a box labeled "Kitchen," fragile, against his chest. He turned, startled, and had found himself blinking into the sun. The man stood tall and easy on the sidewalk, framed by the burning light of the descending sun like a photograph you'd see in a magazine ad for something rugged and reassuring. He wore a sleeveless shirt and faded jeans that had seen more than a few hard days' work. A dusting of sawdust still clung to his forearms, and his voice held that slow, steady rhythm that didn't hurry or apologize. "I'm good," Daniel started, the polite instinct reflexive. "But, thanks." The man tilted his head, not quite smiling, but looking at Daniel with an expression that held a quiet persistence. "I'm Jake. Live right there," he said, jerking his thumb toward the house just across the narrow driveway. "And no offense, but that box looks like it's about to crack you in half." Daniel let out a low laugh, caught somewhere between amusement and resignation. "Daniel. And yeah, I guess I overestimated my upper body strength." Jake stepped forward without waiting for permission, reaching for the box and relieving Daniel of the burden in one smooth motion. His hands brushed Daniel's for just a second, rough and warm. And something about that brief contact sent an unexpected flicker through Daniel's chest. Sharp and unwelcome, or maybe too welcome. Their eyes met for half a second, nothing more. And then Jake turned and headed up the walkway toward the porch. They moved in silence for the next 10 minutes. Jake making small talk about the neighborhood, who walked their dogs religiously, which house had kids, which didn't water their lawn enough. His voice never pushed. He didn't ask too many questions. But every now and then, Daniel caught him glancing over, as if trying to figure something out. The final box hit the floor with a soft thud. "That's it," Daniel said, brushing the sweat from his brow and exhaling. "Thanks, seriously." Jake leaned against the doorway, arms crossed now, the light behind him throwing his face into shadow, his outline unmistakably solid. "You don't have much furniture?" "No," Daniel said, suddenly aware of how bare the place looked. Didn't want to bring too much from before. Jake nodded slowly. "Fresh start?" "Something like that." There was silence again, one that didn't feel awkward, just loaded, like the thick weight of a summer thunderstorm about to break. Jake looked around the empty room, then back at Daniel. "I've got a couch, not using it. Yours if you want it." Daniel hesitated. "That's really generous, but I can't." Jake shrugged. "No strings. Just don't like seeing people sleep on floors if they don't have to." He left without waiting for a response. It took them both to carry it over, and by the time it was in place, worn but clean, the fabric a soft navy. Daniel found himself standing closer to Jake than he'd meant to. Jake straightened up, his face only a foot away, and something in his expression shifted. There was no mistaking it now. The look in his eyes wasn't just neighborly. It was a second too long, a second too still. Daniel's breath caught, and then it passed. Jake took a step back, rubbed the back of his neck, and looked toward the door. I should go clean up. Got sawdust everywhere. Let me know if you need anything else. He left without another word, but Daniel felt the imprint of that moment, hot and humming, long after Jake had crossed the driveway and disappeared inside. That night, as Daniel lay on the borrowed couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow, he thought about the way Jake had looked at him, the way his hand had lingered on Daniel's lower back as they carried the couch, the way their fingers had brushed, and neither of them had pulled away too quickly. He couldn't remember the last time someone had made him feel that seen. He closed his eyes and let the image of Jake's silhouette, sunlit and close, burn into the dark. He didn't sleep for a long time. Morning light filtered through the half-closed blinds, casting soft, slanted lines across the walls and illuminating the faint specks of dust floating through the air. Daniel sat up slowly on the couch. The scratchy navy fabric creased where his body had sunk into it overnight. His back ached faintly, a reminder that even kindness came with a physical cost. But it was the strange tightness in his chest that lingered, like a dream he couldn't quite recall, but that refused to let go. He moved through the morning quietly, unpacking with purpose. The house still felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Even the way his shoes echoed off the bare floors unsettled him. Yet, somewhere in the center of it all, Jake's presence clung to the place, subtle but undeniable. A knock sounded at the door around 10. Daniel wiped his hands on a dish towel and opened it to find Jake standing there, damp hair pushed back, a clean t-shirt stretched across his chest. He held 2 takeout cups and a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee. "Didn't know if you were a coffee guy," he said, holding out the cup. "Figured I'd risk it." Daniel blinked, surprised, then took the offered drink. Their fingers brushed again. "I am," Daniel murmured. "Thanks." Jake stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, as if it had already been granted. He set the bag on the kitchen counter, opened it to reveal a couple of warm pastries, and leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, his stance relaxed but watchful. "You sleep all right?" Daniel nodded, sipping the coffee. "The couch is better than it looks." Jake gave a half smile, small and knowing. "It's got character." For a while they just stood there, sipping coffee, the silence stretching and folding around them like warm fabric. Daniel found himself watching the way Jake's jaw moved as he chewed, how the muscles in his arms tensed subtly each time he adjusted his stance. Jake looked over then, catching him mid-glance. But instead of turning away, Daniel held it, just long enough for Jake's expression to soften into something quieter, something deliberate. That same electric hum filled the air. Jake set his cup down. "I've got a few tools in my garage. Can help you hang shelves or anything that needs fixing up." "That'd be great," Daniel replied, his voice lower than he meant. Jake didn't move. He just nodded once and said, "Later this afternoon?" "Yeah, that works." They spent the day together, moving shelves, drilling brackets, tightening bolts. The rhythm of it was companionable, easy. Jake didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice was calm and unhurried. Daniel found himself laughing more than he had in weeks, smiling at jokes that weren't even that funny, just because they came from Jake's mouth. And then there were the moments in between. Quiet, lingering ones. Jake reaching past him to grab a tool, their shoulders brushing. The curve of Jake's fingers against Daniel's wrist as he steadied a shelf. The way his eyes seemed to trace Daniel's face in those few seconds before he'd look away. The pull between them wasn't loud. It was a soft, steady tide, one that neither of them tried to name. As the afternoon sun slanted low, painting gold across the living room walls, Jake stepped back from the final shelf and surveyed their work. "Not bad," he said, tugging his shirt down and giving Daniel a lopsided grin. "You're officially moved in." Daniel smiled. "Thanks to you." Jake tilted his head. "Don't mention it." Their eyes met again, closer this time. Jake didn't step back. Neither did Daniel. There was a stillness in the air, thick and almost vibrating. Jake's chest rose slowly with each breath, and Daniel could feel the heat radiating between them. It wasn't accidental, this closeness. It had been building all day, like pressure behind a dam. Jake's eyes flicked down, lips, then throat, and back up again. And then, without a word, he stepped away, his breath audible through his nose. He glanced toward the door. "I should let you get some rest." Daniel didn't answer right away. Can I ask you something?" he said softly. Jake turned, his back to the fading light, shadow painting the angles of his face. "Sure." Daniel hesitated. "Why did you come over yesterday?" Jake blinked, but didn't look away. His voice, when it came, was steady. "Because you looked like someone who needed not to be alone." Daniel swallowed. The words settled into him slowly, like rain seeping into dry soil. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Jake stepped forward again, just close enough that Daniel could feel his presence. His voice dropped, lower now, barely above a murmur. And maybe because I didn't want to be alone either. The words hung there, between them, intimate and unsteady. Daniel's breath caught. Jake reached out then, slowly, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Daniel's ear, his fingers warm against his temple. It was a small gesture, innocent. But Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. Neither of them moved. For one long moment, Daniel thought Jake might kiss him, thought he might close the space between them and erase every unspoken thing that crackled in the air. But he didn't. Instead, Jake let his fingers fall away. He looked at Daniel with eyes that held too much heat, too much restraint. "Good night," he said, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him. Daniel stood in the silence, heart pounding, skin still warm from where Jake had touched him. Something had started, quietly, unmistakably, and it wasn't going away. The days blurred after that. Jake didn't come by the next morning, and Daniel didn't see him on the sidewalk or in the driveway. It was as if their closeness, so palpable just 2 nights before, had retreated behind invisible walls. Yet the air outside still carried the same weight. The same slow, simmering tension that wrapped around Daniel's ribs whenever he stepped onto the porch or passed by the window facing Jake's house. He found himself pausing there, fingers lingering on the blinds, eyes searching through the space between hedges. Once or twice, he thought he saw movement, a shadow behind the curtains, the flash of a light being switched off. But it always vanished before he could be sure. By the 4th day, Daniel couldn't take it anymore. He didn't plan what he was going to say, just grabbed a sweater, slipped into his sneakers, and stepped outside with his heart lodged somewhere between frustration and anticipation. The evening was thick with heat. the kind that clung to skin and slowed time. The sun hovered low, casting orange across the front of Jake's house, soft and burnished like the last breath of day. He knocked, waited. The door opened halfway, and there was Jake, barefoot, hair slightly tousled, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans that hung a little too perfectly off his hips. His eyes met Daniel's, unreadable but not unkind. "I was starting to think you'd disappeared," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice light. Jake didn't smile. He didn't frown either, just stepped aside. "I've been around." Daniel stepped in. The house was warm, dimly lit, the faint smell of cedar and something faintly metallic, tools maybe, or wood glue. A fan whirred gently in the corner, and the sound filled the space between them. Jake closed the door behind them, and for a moment, neither moved. "Is something wrong?" Daniel asked, more softly now. Jake looked at him then, really looked. His gaze swept over Daniel's face like he was memorizing it. He walked to the counter, picking up a glass of water, but didn't drink. "No," he said finally. "Just needed space. I didn't want to." He stopped. Daniel took a step closer. "Didn't want to what?" Jake's jaw tensed. He looked down at the glass in his hand, the muscles in his forearm flexing with quiet restraint. "Didn't want to push something that shouldn't be pushed." Daniel's chest tightened. "You didn't." A silence passed between them then, one that felt like a held breath stretching too long. Daniel could feel it again, the pull, that invisible thread that seemed to draw their bodies into the same orbit. He wasn't imagining it. The way Jake stood just a little too still, the way his eyes flicked toward Daniel's mouth and quickly back again. "What are we doing?" Daniel asked, barely above a whisper. Jake finally set the glass down. He turned, his shoulders squared now, his gaze steady but burning. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I haven't stopped thinking about you since the night we moved that couch." Daniel felt the words land like thunder in his chest. He stepped forward, slowly. Each inch closed between them felt heavier than the last. Jake didn't move away. "I've been thinking about you too," Daniel admitted. "About how quiet it got when you weren't around. About how loud everything inside me got." The space between them was barely a breath now, and still, neither moved. Jake's hand lifted, tentative, trembling just slightly, as if afraid to cross that last inch. His fingers hovered near Daniel's jaw, and Daniel turned his face into it, eyes closing. Jake touched him then, just a thumb along his cheek. The lightest brush of skin against skin. But the effect was seismic. Daniel's entire body responded. His breath hitched, his heart stuttered, his spine straightened like a live wire had been threaded through it. Jake exhaled, the sound low, close, unsteady. "I don't want to mess this up," he murmured. Daniel opened his eyes, met Jake's gaze, and said without hesitation, "Then don't." And just like that, Jake leaned in. Their foreheads touched first, and then their noses, their breath mingled, warm and shallow. It wasn't a kiss yet. It was the electricity before a storm, the moment just before the sky breaks open. And then Jake pulled back, just an inch. But it was enough to leave Daniel's breath catching again. "I need to know this isn't just me," Jake said, his voice low, his restraint cracking at the edges. "It's not," Daniel whispered. Jake cupped the back of Daniel's neck, thumb stroking just below his ear. And for one suspended moment, Daniel felt like gravity had shifted. Like the air had thinned. The only thing keeping him grounded was Jake's touch. They stood there for what could have been minutes or hours, eyes locked, bodies close but not yet touching beyond that single point of contact. And then, slowly, Jake stepped away. His absence was immediate. Daniel's skin missed the warmth the moment it vanished. Jake swallowed, looked away. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Jake," Daniel said gently, stepping forward again. "Don't apologize for feeling something." Jake met his eyes again. "I just don't want to ruin it. Whatever this is, you're new here. Maybe you're lonely. I don't want to confuse that." Daniel reached out and touched Jake's chest, just over his heart. He felt the rhythm there. Fast, unsteady, real. "I'm not confused," Daniel said. Jake covered Daniel's hand with his own. The moment didn't explode. It didn't need to. It burned slow. It crackled quiet, and it stayed. That night, Daniel didn't go home. They didn't cross the line, not all the way. They didn't need to. But they sat on the couch together, side by side, their shoulders touching. Jake handed Daniel a blanket, and when it slipped off sometime after midnight, Jake wordlessly pulled it back over him. Their fingers touched once more beneath it, and this time, neither of them let go. The days that followed unfolded like the slow turn of pages in a book. Neither of them dared to rush. Daniel started to feel the rhythm of the new place, the creak of the stairs at night, the soft tick of the thermostat kicking in during the early morning, the gentle hum of the neighborhood around him. But more than anything, he began to feel Jake. Not in the physical sense. Though the memory of Jake's touch, the warmth of his hand beneath the blanket, stayed with him like heat clinging to skin after sun. No, it was the way Jake looked at him now, openly, less guarded, like the door between them had finally, silently, unlocked. There were no declarations, no dramatic shifts, just presence. Jake started spending evenings at Daniel's house. Sometimes helping with lingering boxes or household tasks neither of them seemed in a hurry to finish. Other times just sitting on the porch with beers in hand, talking in low voices about nothing important. Sports, books, old jobs. Childhoods left behind like forgotten photos in drawers. And every now and then, those silences would return, the ones that weren't empty at all. It was during one of those evenings, the sun dipping low behind the neighbor's roof, that Daniel spoke first. "Were you always like this?" he asked quietly, not quite looking at Jake. Jake didn't pretend not to understand. He didn't laugh or deflect. He just leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and took a long breath before answering. "No," he said. "But maybe I always could have been. I just didn't know how." Daniel nodded slowly, the answer settling in his chest like a truth that didn't need a reason. "And now?" Jake turned, met his eyes. "Now I know what I want." A pause, then softer. "The hard part is letting myself have it." The words sat between them like a live current. Daniel's fingers tightened slightly around the neck of his bottle. He looked down at the porch boards, then at the faint outline of their shadows stretching across them, almost touching. "You're allowed," Daniel said after a moment, "to want something good." Jake's jaw flexed, but his eyes didn't leave Daniel's. "I didn't expect you." "I didn't expect you either." Something shifted then, not loud but definitive. Jake stood, not abruptly, just deliberately. He moved to stand in front of Daniel, the space between them narrowing until it felt like the air itself leaned in to listen. Daniel looked up, eyes steady, heart beginning to pound, as if his body sensed what was about to happen. Jake reached out and offered his hand. Daniel took it without hesitation. They went inside. Inside, the atmosphere changed. The light was dimmer, the room quieter. Jake didn't let go of Daniel's hand, not immediately. He pulled him in gently until their bodies were close enough that Daniel could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the small pulse beating at the base of his throat. "I keep thinking," Jake murmured, his voice low and strained. "If I touch you again, I won't want to stop." Daniel's breath hitched. "Then don't." Jake looked at him like a man walking a ledge, terrified and alive all at once. His hand rose slowly, brushing the side of Daniel's face, fingers curving behind his ear. Daniel leaned into the touch like gravity had shifted again, like his whole body answered to that single point of contact. When Jake leaned in, it wasn't rushed. It was the gentlest ache. A breath shared, a pause stretched too long. Their lips met like a secret unfolding in the dark, soft, uncertain at first, and then deeper, hungrier. Daniel's hands found Jake's waist, fingers curling into the hem of his shirt as their bodies pulled closer without thinking, like magnets realigning after too long apart. Jake's hand slid into Daniel's hair, tightening as the kiss deepened, and Daniel felt something inside him loosen, melt, crack open. They parted only to breathe, foreheads pressed together, lips still grazing. Jake's voice was hoarse. "I've wanted to do that since the day I saw you step out of that truck." Daniel gave a breathless laugh. "I thought maybe you hated me. You didn't talk to me for a week. I didn't trust myself." Jake pulled Daniel into a tighter embrace then, his face tucked against Daniel's neck, his arms wrapping around him like he meant to shield him from the world. Daniel melted into it, his own arms sliding around Jake's waist, anchoring them together. Time blurred after that. They didn't talk for a while. Didn't need to. Jake traced the shape of Daniel's shoulder with his fingers, slow and reverent. Daniel breathed in the scent of sawdust and clean soap, and something uniquely Jake. Something grounding, masculine, safe. Later, they sat on the couch again, limbs tangled beneath the same blanket, but now with no careful distance between them. Jake's head rested against Daniel's chest, his breath warm through the thin cotton of Daniel's shirt. "I don't want this to be just something that happened," Jake said quietly. Daniel tightened his arms around him. "It's not." Jake tilted his head up, looking into his eyes. "Promise me." Daniel met his gaze without hesitation. "I promise." And then he leaned down and kissed him again. Not with hunger, but with something even deeper. A promise in the press of lips, a vow without words. Outside, the night deepened. The stars blinked on one by one, silent witnesses to the quiet transformation of two men who had spent too long hiding from the parts of themselves that wanted, no, needed to be seen. Inside, their hearts beat in tandem, and the line they had once feared to cross was now miles behind them. Morning filtered through the window slowly, soft and golden, resting over bare skin and the quiet, tangled sprawl of two bodies beneath a loosely draped blanket. Daniel woke first. Jake lay beside him, one arm curved under Daniel's neck, the other hand resting against his own chest, rising and falling in the rhythm of deep sleep. His hair was slightly mussed, lips parted just enough to let out the faintest breath. Even now, in the stillness of early light, his presence was immense, solid, warm, quietly grounding. Daniel turned onto his side carefully, watching him. Something inside him ached, not with pain, but with fullness, with the weight of everything they'd discovered in each other, the slow draw of something fragile becoming real. The closeness between them now had no name that felt big enough to hold it. Last night hadn't been a confession. It had been a surrender. They hadn't spoken much after that last kiss. Just sat there together until the quiet turned into drowsy intimacy. Until Jake had pulled Daniel gently to lie against him, one hand threaded through Daniel's hair, the other resting over his back. And in that closeness, the space that had once been heavy with caution now opened wide with something else. Not lust, not urgency, permission. And now, in the hush of morning, Daniel allowed himself to let the feeling settle in his chest fully, without resistance. He brushed his fingers along Jake's shoulder, the touch light, careful not to wake him. But Jake stirred anyway, his eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then narrowing just slightly before landing on Daniel. They didn't speak. Jake's fingers found Daniel's hand and curled around it. And that, for a moment, was enough. Later, they sat on the back steps with mugs of coffee, the morning sun warming their skin. The breeze carried the soft rustle of trees and the distant murmur of sprinklers. Jake was quiet, not withdrawn, but thoughtful. He sipped from his mug, then rested his arms across his knees, brow furrowed slightly like a man trying to measure a moment that felt larger than he could admit. Daniel watched him, then reached over, brushing his thumb over the back of Jake's hand. "You're allowed to look happy," he said softly. Jake gave a faint smile. "I think I forgot how to." Daniel tilted his head. "Want me to remind you?" Jake looked at him then, eyes tired but warm. "You already are." They sat that way for a while, no rush, no pressure. Just the comfort of proximity. Jake leaned against Daniel's shoulder, and Daniel rested his head against Jake's. And the world around them moved slowly, gently, with reverence. It wasn't perfect. There were still questions, still hesitations. But there was also trust now. A sense that whatever came next didn't have to be feared, not if they met it together. In the weeks that followed, their rhythm deepened. Jake would still disappear for a few hours to work in his garage, but now Daniel knew the silence wasn't distance. It was space, honored and safe. Sometimes they cooked together, messy, improvised meals that ended in laughter and shared bites off each other's plates. Sometimes they said little at all, just existed in the same space, brushing past each other with quiet touches, a hand on the small of a back, a palm lingering too long on an arm. And every evening, without fail, Jake would find Daniel, on the porch, at the sink, unpacking a box he'd long forgotten, and draw near. He never forced it. He never needed to. Their attraction wasn't something loud or wild. It was a quiet fire, built on glances and breath, on the weight of a hand placed gently at the waist. On the way, Jake would look at Daniel like he was something to be memorized, cherished. Daniel felt seen in a way he hadn't known he was hiding from. And Jake softened. He still carried his silences, his quiet broodings. But now, they ended in touch, in whispered truths exchanged in the dark, in small, spontaneous kisses that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. Not because they were dramatic, but because they weren't. They were ordinary, and that, somehow, made them feel sacred. It happened on a rainy night. The first storm of fall rolled in, heavy and sudden, drumming against the roof, wind battering the windows. Daniel had always found storms unsettling, but this one felt different. He and Jake were curled on the couch, a blanket thrown over their legs, the flicker of a movie playing unseen on the screen. Jake's arm was around Daniel, his fingers tracing slow, aimless shapes along Daniel's shoulder. The air between them was thick, not just with the weight of the storm, but with something unspoken that had been building for days. "I'm scared," Daniel whispered suddenly. Jake looked down at him, stilling. Of what? Daniel swallowed. Of letting this become something. Of it changing everything. Of losing you, if it does. Jake shifted, pulling Daniel in tighter. Then let's not lose each other, he said simply. Let's be brave enough to want this, and smart enough to hold on to it. Daniel looked up at him, his chest tightening, and in the silence that followed, Jake leaned down and kissed him. Not like the first time, not with hesitation, but with the full weight of a man who had made a choice. And Daniel kissed him back with everything he had left to give. That night, as the storm passed overhead and the sky cracked open with thunder and light, Daniel and Jake crossed a threshold that had long since disappeared. Not in urgency, not in heat, but in reverence. And when the morning came, they didn't speak of it like it was a turning point. They just woke up still touching, still wrapped in each other, and smiled like it had always been this way. Daniel never forgot that first day. The awkward boxes, the aching muscles, the stranger on the sidewalk offering his help. And Jake never forgot the way Daniel had looked at him when he offered the couch. In that gaze had been something he didn't yet recognize, but now knew better than anything else. A beginning. And as the seasons changed and the world outside shifted and moved on, inside that little house, two men found something lasting. Not perfect, not easy, but theirs. Entirely and irrevocably theirs.